Plot twists are not optional. Maybe when I say the words plot twist, what comes to mind for you is some kind of gimmick in the middle of a movie or maybe near the end that forces you to recontextualize all the previous events of the story leading up to that twist. But the truth is that plot twists aren't a cute little writing technique that writers use to trick their readers or viewers about the plot of their story. They're actually a fundamental requirement for any book worth reading. And I'll tell you why right now, but when I give you the reason, don't get scared, okay? Focus. Here it is. Plot twists are not optional because they are one of the two primary mechanisms by which plot progress in a story actually happens. Mull over that for a second. I think we can all agree that plot progress is not optional. So let me explain my proposition, and by the end of this video, you will understand that the reason why some books you've read suck so bad is because they have failed to twist the plot. So let's start with plot progress. What does this phrase actually mean? If the plot is the sequence of events that move the story from state A in the beginning to state B in the end, we can think of the plot like the series of moves in a game of chess. This was the beginning. This was the end. The moves were the plot. This was the story. And plot progress happens when every new move is made. If a new move isn't made, then the plot didn't progress. Not just anything is going to progress the plot. If you're a writer, you already know that making characters take random actions or making time pass in the story doesn't progress the plot. I mean, you can have your characters spend hours doing a dialogue exchange, but that's not going to progress the plot necessarily. If you're reading a book or watching a movie, you can feel when the plot's not progressing and the writer's wasting your time. You're not getting what you came for because the story's not moving along. But how to progress the plot of a story is something of a vague and mystical notion. Many writers start their writing projects with a strong sense of certain scenes, and these are the scenes that inspire them to write the story in the first place. But one of their biggest problems is figuring out how to string those scenes together, to move the plot and weave together the most important and brilliant and exciting scenes. And if I can be so real, there are not really a lot of good resources actually telling writers how to progress the plot. It is such a funny mystery that as a reader you can tell when the plot isn't moving, but as a writer you have no idea how to actually make it move. The tools of analysis truly are not the tools of construction. This is one of the biggest lessons I learned in my 8 years of novel writing. You can watch the video I made on that here. Everybody will tell you to progress the plot, but nobody will give you specific instructions on how. But I will. Now again, don't get scared when I say it, because it took me 8 years to figure this out. And I'm going to give you like a quick summarized version here. But once you do understand it, you'll know that this is the answer you've been searching for and that you don't need to look anywhere else. Here we go. If you're not a writer, see if you can spot where plot twists come in. When you think about what a story actually is, it is essentially all only information. In the process of telling a story, you are sentence by sentence disseminating information so that your audience can compile the information and get a gestalt overall understanding of some single event. The process of telling a story is essentially a process of relaying information. At the start of the story, some information is known only by the reader. For example, if they're genre savvy and they pick up a mystery novel, they know that somebody is probably going to die at the end of Act 1. Some information is known only by the characters. For example, all the characters know their own backstory, but the reader doesn't get that straight up. Some information is known to both the reader and the characters. But not everybody necessarily has the same information. The events that happen over the course of the story is information that is learned by the reader and the character at the same time. So in reading a story or telling a story or living through a story as a character, new information is gained. And this is the first mechanism of plot progress, gaining new information, additional information. However, not all information is actually correct or true. Characters have misconceptions, misinterpretations, and assumptions, and the readers have these too. So sometimes, the new information gained isn't an addition, but an alteration or an edit of pre-existing information. And these are the two primary mechanisms by which plot progress actually occurs. This second one here, these edits, These are what get called plot twists. They are a kink in the smooth, straight line of a story. They are, or can be, a subversion of expectations. And here's the nuance that ties everything together. This subversion of expectations doesn't only have to happen to the reader. If this twist of information happens only to the characters, that will successfully progress the plot too. So even the most typical plot twists, like for example in a fantasy story, when the protagonist is revealed to secretly be royalty, but the reader kind of knew this all along, or in a romance story when it turns out that the protagonist's love interest likes them back after all, these still count as twists and these still progress the plot. Because the point of plot twists isn't for the writer and the reader to play a cute little competitive game with each other, where the writer tries to see if they can get away with pulling their tricks, and the reader tries to see if they can catch them in the act. Maybe that's how some writers and readers want to conduct themselves, but that's not the main point of a plot twist. The point of a plot twist is to progress the plot by making alterations to the pool of known information and to build a story that's structurally sound, a story that actually moves along. Now you might be wondering, Yuxa, if there are two mechanisms that progress the plot, why did you say that plot twists are not optional? Wouldn't it theoretically be possible to write a story that has its plot progress purely by informational additions and not include any plot twists? Now I have to admit, you might be right. But the reason that I said plot twists are not optional is because I assumed we were talking about well-written, enjoyable, interesting stories, not stories that happen to pass the minimum requirements for classification as a story. But maybe I shouldn't have assumed that. That's my bad. But let me tell you why stories without plot twists are inferior to stories that use them. The ceiling for how interesting these no plot twist stories can potentially be is set by the content of the story. The information and ideas of the story have to be interesting if there's no plot twists. However, when there are plot twists, the writer of the story is demonstrating an awareness of storytelling, not just story ideas or story thinking. These writers are demonstrating that they have an ability to write on a structural level. Almost any content can be made interesting with plot twists. The world of story possibilities is wider. Who knows that an interesting idea or event, told badly or relayed badly, makes for a bad story? Furthermore, plot twists play with the expectations of readers and the characters of the story. And having expectations, making predictions about future events, this is such a fundamental part of thinking and being alive that it goes such a long way to giving a story verisimilitude, a sense of lifelikeness. Would you be interested in reading a book that not only do you, the reader, know perfectly everything that is going to happen, but all of the characters in the story also had the complete certainty of events that are going to happen, and none of those characters ever said or did anything that surprised each other? Would that be an interesting book? The story wouldn't come alive. It would be like watching performers on a stage stiffly deliver their lines. I think that stories that make no acknowledgement of expectations of readers, viewers, or characters in the story could be okay for people like children or anyone else who's getting into reading books or watching movies for the first time. Stories for beginners that are just getting started out with consuming stories. Because when there are no plot twists, there is a whole level of basic human psychology and experience that the writer is neglecting to show. So now you know, plot twists are not optional, because failure to include them is a failure to progress the story in an interesting way. If you're a writer, I hope this helped you, and if you're not a writer, I hope that learning this deepened your appreciation for the engineering that goes into the craft. And now you can enjoy the stories that you read and watch and hear even more. If you like these advanced and technical breakdowns of writing stories, watch my video on how to write a deep novel next.